Thank you, Kent, for such a kind introduction. I'm grateful, and thanks, Kelly, for what a terrific meeting that you have today into TechQuest, and for inviting me to join you this morning to share some insights. I also want to thank you for your flexibility in moving some things around. I know that was difficult. So thank you. I'm delighted to be here. What an exciting time it is. And I'm going to share a little bit with you. We've been doing a lot of work, both prior to Tuesday, when President Obama signed into law the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. A lot of work on helping to shape the legislative language, and then it feels really good to see a lot of the provisions move through. I'm going to spend some time, given we're just a week out, talking a little bit about that as part of our remarks. I'm going to leave enough time for questions and then link it back to the important work, the leadership that you are demonstrating here in central Pennsylvania. Let me see if I can. So Kent talked about who we are. We're about 2.5 hours from here in Washington. We're a multi-stakeholder group. We look to find common ground across very diverse perspectives that got a little bit heated there near the end, particularly around the privacy provisions. I think we were able to get consensus on many areas, but fell short there. I think the language that ended up in the law is the best that anyone could do in sort of reaching out to and getting the different organizations, consumer groups, health plans, employers, physicians, tech vendors to agreement on how one might move forward. But that's what we do every day. But we don't just we have been spending a bit of time inside the Beltway over the last few months as things have really come to a head here, but have spent most of our history out in the field working with folks like you and understanding what makes it work and what doesn't make it work, the barriers you might face, and then strategies that many of your colleagues across the country have utilized to overcome those barriers. So let's dive in. I'm looking at my watch here. I think we've got about 30 minutes, maybe 35 minutes. This is lengthy. I know the slides will be made available to you. I've purposely given you a lengthy deck. I'm not going to go through all the words in it, though. We won't have enough time. But given the state of where you are, here in central Pennsylvania, I'll try to touch on the things that might be of most interest to you, whether they might present barriers. But for the most part, most of these provisions will provide opportunities for you as you move forward. So Kelly talked about this large investment, this net investment of about $19 billion. If you take a look at it, it's really in two buckets. We've got $2 billion in immediate discretionary funding that's going to go into the Office of the National Coordinator. Severely underfunded and not yet authorized by Congress. Office is going to grow quickly and it will be very, very busy over the next several months. There's a lot of work to do. The legislation isn't very prescriptive. Well, let me go over the broad. So we've got $2 billion there. And then what we have is about $29 billion that will go out in incentives in Medicare, primarily Medicare and Medicaid incentives. Well, when they score this stuff to move it through Congress to make sure that it'll work with the budget, they score savings, and this was the last scoring of the language of the bill. It was $12 billion. So that nets, if you combine those things, it nets to $19 billion in net investments. But most of the dollars are going to be spent on incentives that will go out primarily to healthcare professionals, and hospitals are also covered under this. And the rest we'll talk about what it will cover. If you look at the fine language, there are other areas within the Act that will impact you. There's a whole section on broadband technology that I don't have up here, and there is additional funds. $1.5 billion for community health centers might have an impact, and perhaps the $1.1 billion to ARC, the secretary. Hopefully we'll have a secretary of HHS soon, because there's a lot of work to do. You know, we need the secretary and then the layer underneath the secretary to move all of this work forward. But there is a big chunk of funds on comparative effectiveness research that's moving forward. So let's go through some of the provisions. It's early, you've had your coffee. We don't have much time, I'll stick to the things that I think will be of most interest. And if you want to go back and talk more, I'll leave about 10 minutes for Q&A. So, Office of the National Coordinator, pretty underfunded, right? Over the last few years, 50 million, maybe 100 million, most of which has been pushed out. Big job moving forward, plays a critical role. The first thing, and this matters to us, is the strategic plan. If you remember, I don't know how many of you have read the National Coordinator Strategic Plan that was shared, I think it was last June, it was last summer. Remember when that came out? That needs to be updated now under the law, and it needs to be done so working with other federal agencies as well as private sector collaborators. Got to include some measurable outcome goals in there, just as you've done and are doing locally with your initiatives. And it's going to be a plan against which many elements, if not all, of the provisions need to tie back to. So this piece is pretty important. I'm going to come back to this. Well, no, let's go through this now. There are just a couple of other things before I dive into the details that will really have an impact on you. There is some language around if the Secretary determines that needs aren't being met, demands and needs of providers are not being substantially and adequately met through the marketplace. It enables HHS, the Secretary, to actually develop its own federal health IT and to charge a nominal fee. So that was tucked in there in the language as an option, but would not go into play unless a determination was made that we're not getting there on the private sector. I'm doubtful that this will actually move forward, but somebody did put it in. And then we're going to come back to privacy, and there is a whole section on privacy in the bill, in the law, and I'm not going to cover it today. It's probably 2 hours, and I know you're going to spend a lot of time on it over the next several months as you move forward. But there are several provisions that offer more guardrails for privacy, including Chief Privacy Officer within 12 months, within the National Coordinator, and then regional privacy or HIPAA privacy officers across the country. Okay, things that you'll need to think about and take into account as you move forward. The first is in standards and policy. So why do we care about this? Why do we care about the standards? And talking with a number of the staff as this was moving forward, there was a lot of worry. You know, we're getting some pressure to move those incentives to start earlier, maybe 2010, not 2011, the staff were saying. We're getting some pressure to put more money out there faster. But there was a whole set of folks within Congress that were worried that the standards weren't ready. And so there's a lot of dialogue going on around standards right now. So there's pretty aggressive requirements in this act around standards, and they're designed to make sure we've got some good solid standards before big money goes out the door around accountability and making sure that what we implement is interoperable and connects. And you're going to see that theme across all elements of the bill. As we know that much of the value that we derive from health IT, while some is derived from use within the physician office, most of the value is derived from the exchange of data across organizations, one of the key goals that you're moving forward with your initiatives here. Okay, so what's going to happen? Well, by the end of this year, we're about 9 months out, the Secretary, whoever he or she shall be, we understand it might be a she, shall through a rulemaking process adopt an initial set of standards. And these are going to be really important because, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit, those are going to be standards that are actually recommended by a new committee called a Standards Committee in alignment with the priorities of yet another new committee called a Policy Committee, both of which will reside in the federal government as FACA bodies. And the reason those standards are important is the feds themselves, the federal agencies, will need to adopt over time in their systems as they purchase them and upgrade them, shall utilize where available those standards. And then even things around, look at this third bullet here, Agencies relating to promoting quality and efficient health care in federal government, in other words, those who purchase health care, Medicare, OPM, and the like, will also require that their providers with which they contract, either directly or indirectly, use such standards. So that's a big deal.